Works. Here's Don McPherson, brought to you by Fellman Brothers here. Don, you got to get in on this. There's winners get washed shirts now with orange bars of soap on it. Donnie, in support of all the kooky things Fran's been saying this week. You in on a winners get washed Fran Brown shirt?
I don't know anything about that. I'm a spectator like you on this one.
Okay. Did you hear what Fran said earlier this week? That apparently, like, after losses, he puts off showering for like several days until he can properly dig down, watch the film, vent about the loss and the whole thing. He said he didn't actually suds up again until Monday morning.
Well, I gotta say, if he's going for the old school, the old Syracuse coaching thing, my old coach Bill Maxwell did not wash his practice shirt, the shirt he wore during practice, after a win. And by the time we went undefeated, and coaches had him take the shirt out of the coach's locker room because it was stinking up the coach's locker room. So this is old school superstitions that a lot of coaches. You think these guys are stable? You think they look good on the sideline, but those wins and losses start to get to you after a while.
Yeah, I didn't know that undefeated season had such negative consequences for you guys back in the day, Donnie. That is dangerous in practice.
Oh my goodness, it was gamey. I remember it. It was disgusting.
Yeah, I mean, that's probably. I'm sure you can summon the smell here now, 37 years after the fact. My goodness, that had to be. That's worse than a hockey locker room. I mean, that had to be rank.
Exactly.
Yeah, they've got washers in the facility for a reason to take care of that stuff. But you can hear just how disappointed Fran was in that loss on Saturday. Obviously, the run defense just got absolutely shredded. It has to be disheartening, right, Donnie, to lose a game. Not to lose a game. I mean, to lose any game, but to lose it that way, where BC's running power and counter. And that was basically it all game long. They're running the two simplest run plays in the book, and you couldn't do anything for it.
Yeah, just talking about Fran Brown and like the old school sort of superstitions and all those kinds of those things. The run game, the game of football. I don't care how many times Kyle McCord could throw the football down the field. You have to be able to stop the run. You have to be able to run the football. And I looked at the stats and I wasn't sure if I was looking at it right. But Syracuse only had, now you have to count the sacks in it, 39 yards rushing versus Beast 313. You can't win with that imbalance. And when you give them 198 to Robichaud, you're just going to get crushed. And that does become demoralizing for a coach, especially a coach. And Fran Brown talks about being tough. We saw this early on in the season. There wasn't a lot of tough play on the defense, bad tackling. I think we saw a return of that against Boston College.
Yeah, we talked about this after the Pittsburgh game because of obviously the pick sixes and all that stuff. Are like, well, Virginia Tech, just by the nature of it, has to look at what happened there and at least attempt to replicate it in some way. Now we look at Cal here coming this week. Like, you have to watch. I get their quarterback threw for 400 yards the other day, but man, you got to watch that tape and be like, well, maybe we should hand the ball off a few times on Saturday.
Yeah, and you got to be careful with Cal. I know we've talked about this in the past. I think they're the best worst team in the conference, probably in the country.
Yep.
Their nine losses are by a total of their 4 losses, a total of 9 points. This is a tough football team. They're a gritty football team. They helped Pitt scoreless in the second half. They played Miami to a point. You're exactly right. They're going to watch that film, and you're going to bet they're going to come out and try to pound the football at Syracuse, realizing that now again they've got Syracuse traveling from Boston to the Bay Area. I mean, you don't have a bigger swing in travel in all of college football, and so this is going to be a tough week for Syracuse. They better get their tough shoes on because I think Cal's going to come right out of them.
Yeah, this is technically the furthest Syracuse has gone to play a football game since that Tokyo Bowl game against Louisville in '89. I guess I'm thinking of their West Coast trips. Apparently, it's slightly further to Cal than it was to USC and Washington, that were 2 road games under Marone. So, is there really any difference in that? Not really. But this is technically as far as Syracuse can go to play a game here in the ACC this week.
Yeah, it's going to be a challenge, and especially, again, having been in Boston, this is, like I said, is about as far as you have to travel in a given week. It shortens the week because you want to get out there early so you're not sleeping in your own beds for one less day. And we saw how they struggled after bye week. So the travel definitely does has to be taken into consideration in this game.
Yeah, from my understanding, they're out there already. Their plan was to leave this morning, and they could be. I imagine they're practicing out there right now, which was the plan. Well, how much does that help to get out there, get your feet on the ground a day early, and be boots on the ground out there for 2 days before game time?
I don't know if it helps so much, because I think one of the things that happens, if you go, you're tired from a long flight, but you go play, and you just go, and you're still in your old rhythm. If you go and you get out there a day earlier, now tomorrow becomes a really long day for them. And so I don't know if going out an extra day really gives you any advantage or any extra rest, because that Friday is going to be the longest Friday they've ever had.
Yeah, I mean, that's a long day sitting around. Yeah, I'm sure they'll walk through or do whatever, but yeah, that's a long day, because it's not like they're going to go see the sights, right? It's like, well, we got an hour. Let's go to Alcatraz. Like, they're not going to go see. Have you heard they've got great sourdough bread out here? Let's hop a trolley. Like, you're not going to. I'd imagine some other people in the travel party will do some of that stuff, but like, if you're the team, you're just putzing around all day long, right?
Exactly. That's what I mean by that long day. There's not much you can do. You can only work out so much. Hopefully they'll take some books out there and do a little studying. But other than that, there's going to be a lot of sitting around tomorrow, and that's when you get lazy. That's when your body starts to settle in. Even though it's a 3-hour time difference, but again, there's only so much workout and practice you can do. You don't want to do extra film. You don't want to bog guys down a day before the game. So it makes it a very long trip. And I remember my old coach used to always say, "This is when you can get logy." That was his name for getting lazy, and it can make you lazy. So it definitely does take into. And you're exactly right. If I were on that trip, I'd be going up to Napa with a little extra time and taking a little wine. But that's not something these guys can do. Yeah,
I mean, I think back. I was on a decade ago on the USC trip and the Washington trip. Like, hey, it was great. Saw a Dodgers game. Got out and about. Like, went to the fish market in Seattle. Like, you do all the things one does. But I wasn't hanging with the players or the coaches on those days. We kind of went and did our own thing. It was, in fact, go figure, the trip out to USC, that was the day the news broke that Syracuse was joining the ACC. So I don't think any landmark news such as that is going to happen on this trip out to the West Coast. All right, Don McPherson with us, our weekly conversation brought to you by Fellman Brothers. So here we are, Don, 6-3, 3 games left. It feels like, okay, yeah, you're bowl eligible, but man, you still got a big chance here, right, over the next 3 games to push this season to a different level, even though it is no longer the conference title game or some of the stuff that was talked about a few weeks ago.
Yeah, without question, you got to figure that UConn has got to be a win, and then you got a tough Miami game. This is going to be a tough game against Cal, but you're exactly right. A win against Cal, and then you go into Miami with 8 wins under your belt, not looking past UConn too quickly, and then that Miami game gets really interesting because you're potentially looking at a team that might be headed to the playoffs. So they can definitely put themselves in a position where people are paying attention to that Miami game in ways that they probably won't be if they drop the Cal.
Yeah, and obviously now Miami's lost last week. The ACC here finds themselves in a bit of a perilous position here, Don. We're looking at the college football playoff rankings as they came out this past Tuesday. And obviously, Miami dropped with the loss. SMU is still kind of hanging where they are. It's becoming harder and harder right now to see a path right for the ACC to get multiple teams here into the playoff this year.
Yeah, the 2 teams that have a shot, like you mentioned, Miami and SMU, and right now SMU has a clearer path, and so it's going to be tough for the ACC. And what makes it tough for the ACC are schools like Indiana that just kind of snuck in and makes the Big Ten look really strong in the playoff. And so the SEC is always going to have their guys, and so it's going to be tough for the ACC. And like I said, Miami, as you said, Miami and SMU have the clearer paths.
Yeah, SMU is the only team that is undefeated in ACC play. Nobody is undefeated overall at this point, and it leads to the thing here, Don. Like there is literally no way to have anybody other than the league champion have one loss anymore overall. Like, if the ACC is to get a second team in the playoff, it's going to be just by the nature of a 2-loss team here.
Yes, and that's not a bad thing. I think, as the playoff expands, you're going to have teams that aren't stellar records, aren't undefeated, and the SEC is going to cannibalize itself, as we saw Georgia struggling, and so it's a good thing to have a two-loss team, because that means that September games don't kill you,
right?
And you can have a loss in September, and your fans don't quit. Guys aren't jumping into the transfer portal and all those kinds of things that, when guys give up on the team, as the Florida State team gave up on them last year. So it keeps teams in, and I think it's a good thing. Keeps teams in and fan base in and excited right through November.
Yeah, that's where it's going to be interesting this year to find out if it's is it only the SEC and Big Ten fan bases that applies to when it comes to the playoffs, or will it be any of the other leagues as well? We'll find that out here over the course of the next month or so. All right, Don, the injuries this year, I'm looking at the injuries, and obviously it's something we've talked about a lot here over recent years. It's really starting to add up here a little bit. We heard from Fran yesterday. Jaden Bellamy's out for this week. Marcellus Barnes has already gone from the secondary. We know the defensive line. There's a lot of freshmen playing now. I'm starting to look at all these injuries, and we talked about it last year. It feels like the only difference right now is that the quarterback's healthy, right? Like the rest of the team's starting to get kind of beat up.
Yeah, it's tough when you see guys. Like, I think last week we had two guys go down in successive plays on the offensive side with Gatson. I think was and who else got hurt right before Gatson went down? Somebody else went down.
Yeah, Gatson lost time. Marlo Wax was in and out late. There was a variety of guys down the stretch there.
And this is when, we talked about this early in the season with regard to special teams. This is when the guys who aren't playing, the guys who transferred in or transferred, who came here for an opportunity, this is when they got to step up. And sometimes you don't know who those guys are. You don't know what they've got because you haven't seen them in action. So this is, every team goes through it. Every school goes through it. But you're exactly right. As long as Kyle McCord, I can't say as long as he stays healthy, but having a quarterback healthy and having some consistency in the backfield with Quinn Allen staying healthy, those things are really important.
Yeah, that is a fact. That is a fact. And you mentioned like these young guys. How does Syracuse handle it here? Because Fran's talking about, hey, we're playing freshmen up front, and they're some of our biggest guys right now. And now you're going to have more young guys on the back end. What does that leave you susceptible to here when, all right, it's game 10, and just by the nature of the beast, you're going to have some inexperience out there?
You're going to have a lot of inexperience, and also, we talked about this in September. When you have guys who transfer, you don't spend a lot of time. You don't get to know guys. You don't know what they're like in game. Again, we talked about this early in the season. The first time you're on a headset with a coach, a new coach, you learn what that coach is like in the game. You learn what, I remember that moment when Kyle McCord was throwing all those interceptions against Pitt, that moment that he and Fran Brown looked at each other's eyes and say, okay, what's this guy like in this moment? And so when you have young players who get thrown into the game this late in the season, you don't know how they're going to respond. And, we're talking about now whether or not that game against Miami is going to mean anything, which puts a lot of pressure on on Saturday. It puts a lot of pressure on those young guys coming in. You don't know what you have until you see a guy in battle. And so when you have young guys jumping in this late in the season, you're really kind of just flying blind with how they respond.
All right, Donnie, what's your sense of how things play out on Saturday?
I think it's going to be a tough game. I've been saying this about Cal. I've had this game in my mind all season because it's a new opponent in the conference. It's a long trip. Again, coming after the BC trip. And I watched Cal early in the season with a lot of curiosity of that team coming into the ACC. Their long trip to Miami. This team scares me, and their quarterback had a great week last week. They're going to see the number 3 pass rusher, sack leader in the conference. They've been facing those guys the last 3 weeks. Good sack guys on the defensive front. This team scares me. I would say of any game that I went into thinking it's going to be a tough one, it's this one.
They will pick you off. They got a guy that gets after the quarterback, and they just put up 40-something to Wake Forest last week. So it'll be an intriguing game for sure coming up Saturday, 3 o'clock against Cal out on the West Coast. All right, Donnie, good stuff as always. Enjoy the game. Enjoy the weekend. We'll talk next week.
My pleasure, Brad. We'll talk next week.